Hi, everyone. I'm Frank Stanishi of Open Forum, Candid, Frank, and Live. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV Sticks, Roku Sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on Open Forum, Nicki Ward, candidate for council in the Toronto Centre, Ward 13. I had to separate Ward and your name because it was going to come out Ward. So I didn't want to do that. So I'll tell you, it had me in hysterics. I'm going, now, what do I do with that? Ward for Ward. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't mean to make fun of your name.
No. It's very, very handy. I mean, ward councillor, councillor ward sounds like
it's,
a palindrome, and
it's
it's
meant to
hilarious.
be.
It's hilarious too because some of my opponents are saying my name hundreds of times in their promotional material. So it's one of those rare occasions where having generally at school, of course, having a name like Ward meant I was the last one to be called, called to the dinner table. But yeah, it's working out to our advantage in Ward 13.
Well,
So.
here in my riding, they have a guy with a W. His name's White, and he asks all the voters to start at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, we've used that too. The bottom line, the bottom line. That's another good gag for those of us at the end of the list. It's a fairly for a Toronto Centre. Actually, usually we have a much larger field of candidates. In 2018, the last crazy election, there were close to 18 or 19 candidates, and in this election, we see the field really much smaller. There's uh, about six active candidates, and a very short list of those of us who are actually have experience in politics.
It's called Toronto Center for the reason for a reason. It's in the center, and in the picture behind me, you'll see downtown Toronto. You'll see the
Right.
CN Tower, and that's pretty much the riding you're vying for as a candidate.
Yeah, that's correct. It is. It's actually the smallest riding in Canada, so it's only 6.5 or 7 square kilometers, but it's got 110,000 people in it. So the wards now are, the size of a small city, actually the size of a small province when you think about it. So the role of city councillor has changed significantly. You can't be run it like a convenience store or a coffee shop. You have to run it like the big business that it is. And that's one of the key differences we think that we bring to the table in our campaign. I guess we'll get into that later on.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? About the elimination of wards and making the wards bigger?
Well, I ran in 2018 in a ward that no longer exists. I was, very pleased to do so. And then when the rules changed to align the city wards with the provincial ridings and the federal ridings, which actually, has some merit to it. I mean, when we're trying to do things like flood control and housing and so forth, dealing with you want to deal with the fewest number of politicians possible. And by aligning the boundaries, that does create some kind of efficiencies. The downside, of course, is that in the middle of the last election, many of us were kept caught flat footed and had the unenviable decision to say, well, do we get out of the race or do we continue to run? I chose to continue to run because there were a number of issues that I wanted to raise. But the size of the ward, the size of the administrative burden that comes with this amazing job means that you really do need to have some significant senior management skills and significant executive experience. And we're talking, in my own case, I mean, I've done a lot of social advocacy over the years. That's an important part of why I'm running, to be of service. But prior to that, I was a vice president of a small insurance company. And that, an executive at the executive level, you get used to dealing with large numbers, relatively large numbers, millions of dollars, hundreds of employees, if not thousands of people that you're responsible to. So, yeah, the role has changed, and yet the process for selecting our councillors hasn't. I'm really glad. Thank you for inviting me, Frank, on this show, because one of the things that I really miss from the various debates that are out there is hard questions about whether a person is actually qualified for the job or not. This is it's bizarre to go for a go for any job interview and they say, well, are you qualified for the job? In this ward, that is rarely the question one is asked. One is asked, what is your position on this? What is your position on that? Which is important,
Well,
but the,
let's entertain that conversation. I'm more than glad to hear how you qualify.
well, I came here about 35 years ago. And I came from England originally. This accent isn't fake.
Oh, okay, good. I get it.
And I was working in the United States as a bright young person, and then I came up to Toronto Centre on business, and I had I fell in love. I mean, it sounds corny to say that, but it was a visceral experience. Hit me right here. I was like, this has. I left England when it was going through an economic downturn. Everything old is new again. But I left you, so there weren't the opportunities for a young person who was, full of a bit of hustle. But I lived in the United States, and there was something missing there. And when I came here, I saw that missing component. I've got the hustle of North America, and it's sort of cultural things, a way of life that I approve of. We have a universal healthcare system, we have blended communities, we have, it's quite a lot like where I grew up in England. So I fell in love when I came here, and then throughout that time, I've been engaged in community advocacy. So and across party lines. I call myself an advocate, not an activist, because while there's nothing wrong with being an activist, to me, it's all about giving voice to people who don't have voice. And that means working across party lines. So our logo over here shows, we have a broad base of support from, I mean, you can figure out the color scheme for yourself, right? We
Uh,
have so that's part of it. And then the other part of it is just the business management skills. And so if you want to talk about some of the social advocacy I've done, I mean, I helped change the Constitution of Canada. My team and I helped change the Charter of Rights and Freedom to include gender identity and gender expression. And you can't do that by name calling or partisan politics. You have to work across party lines. So in terms of
I like what you said about advocate and activist because an
Mhm.
activist isn't necessarily an advocate, but an advocate can be an activist.
That's right. That's exactly right. I
I
mean,
just want to
when
make
my
sure the listeners understand what you meant by that, because and the viewers.
Yeah, no, I mean, when my son was hyperactive when he was a kid, but and he's a grown man now, but being an active kid doesn't mean you actually get things done, and that's for me a key difference. And there's a real world component to that, right? I mean, it is in social media has meant that people think that clicking like on a Facebook page is the same as voting, and it isn't. And so I mean, we're seeing that change a little bit, but really at the municipal, one of the great things that what you're doing here is reminding people that you do actually have to. Well, you don't even have to leave the house. You can mail in the vote, but you must vote officially, not a Facebook poll, not a Twitter poll, not a TikTok poll, but we have to remain engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you used that word because I was going to use it. Yes, engagement is the most important thing that voters can do, and that again implies that they are actively listening, and
Mhm.
therefore it means they're thinking. And if they're thinking, it means you, the candidate, can reach them with what you're trying to show is the reason why they should vote for you over the next candidate. So why should voters vote for you instead of the other candidates that are in the field without attacking individual candidates? That's not my intent. But
No, 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 no.
what separates you from the other candidates?
Well, to begin with, 35 years of actually getting the laws of the land changed for the betterment of people in Toronto Centre, Toronto, and in fact, Canada. The Making sure that we have human rights for everybody helps everybody. See, the thing about gender identity rights, I mean, there's a little bit of controversy about that that goes backwards and forwards. But the truth of the matter is that if we accept there's such a thing as a Canadian value, and one of those values is fairness. It really doesn't matter to me whether my neighbor is gay or straight, transgender or cisgender. What matters to me is that my neighbor's got a snowplow that he'll let me use, right? That kind of spirit of cooperation is a fundamentally a Canadian thing. And so in all the things where we talk about accessibility, gender identity, inclusion, I use my modus operandi for that is to make sure that if it's inclusive for everybody, it's inclusive for this particular section, which is an unusual approach. So I don't know if that takes us off on too much of a tangent
No,
there.
no, no. I think you're expressing one of your planks on your platform. It's not everything. It's not the be end all. You
Well,
know.
sure. Yeah, I mean, there is this thing called identity politics where you have to say, you know, if you're gay, if you're disabled, if you're trans or whatever, and you lead with that. And I actually do identify on many of those fronts. I'm what's known as an equity-seeking candidate. But that's not why I think people should vote for me. I think people should vote for whoever they think is best able to do the best job for all of the residents of, in this case, Toronto Centre. Uh, so my lived experience from multiple angles really helps. I mean, the stuff on the website that will tell you many of the achievements that uh, I've been able to achieve with
Share
others.
some. Share some.
Let's see now. Well, gender identity, right? So we changed the law, the Constitution of Canada, to include people who were previously not allowed to participate in society at all. You know, it takes a village to do things, and if we have some people, whether it's because of color or gender or orientation, who aren't allowed to participate, everybody loses. You know, so. And prior to the law changing, I wasn't, I used to work in the insurance industry, as I say, as a vice president. But when I came out, I couldn't get work anywhere, not because of my competence, but because of bigotry and because the law of the land didn't protect me. I've been able to contribute to society because now the law of the land enables me and many other people to do that. So that's important work. At the provincial level, in the last election, I ran and wanted to bring issues of about the disability to the forum. I'm a person with a disability, and ODSP, the provincial program that helps support people with disabilities, hasn't increased for well over a decade. And what I presented as an argument was not only that this is the compassionate thing to do to make sure that people with disabilities are properly supported, but also to make the health insurance argument that if a person with a disability cannot afford to feed themselves, they become sick. And therefore, it's not just the right thing to do, it's the compassion, it is the economically sensible thing to do. And because of pushing it in that sense, not just railing and saying you're an evil person for not doing it, but showing the societal and the economic benefit, the current provincial government has increased Ontario disability benefits. Not much, not quite enough, but they've recognized that there is a compassionate argument and an economic argument. So that's at the provincial level. At the city level, well, the list is pretty long. I've been doing this for about 30 plus years, but I have been managed to remain a critic of police services without actually getting into an adversarial situation. And so during the dreadful when the search for Bruce McArthur and dreadful murders he was conducting in a neighborhood where I live, I was able to bridge the gap between the previous investigation, which was broadly recognized to be incompetent.
He was targeting gay men.
He was targeting people in Toronto Centre, some of whom were gay men, but some of whom were not. And
Ah,
one of the problems was that the City of Toronto's process for registering missing and murdered people was broken. And so some of the men came into the neighborhood, but because they were missing from, let's say, Brantford or Hamilton, they weren't showing on Toronto Centre's record as missing persons because the systems didn't talk with each other. We also had the person called Allura Wells, who was a trans woman, misidentified in the middle of the investigation. And again, because her body was found on 53 Division, which is just to the north of Bloor Street, and because Toronto Centre begins just to the south of Bloor Street, 51 Division, there was no communication between the two. That's just craziness. So pointing that out, whether it's due to bigotry or just ordinary incompetence or lack of thought or just this is something that I've been able to do. So police reform, not defund, refund, or whatever, but let's get value for money, which is by definition inclusive for everybody, right? Because we all want to feel safe. So that's one example of and I'm also, for example, in my own case, I'm on the board of directors of City Park Co-op, which is one of the largest co-ops in North America. And so that's one of the things I've done. And I've also been on the board of directors of the 519 Community Center, which is a city agency. So, 30 years, you get to do a lot of things. And those are three different parts of government that I've been able to affect change with.
Yeah, because results are dependent on method, means, and understanding, right? So
Yeah,
I guess what you're saying about so I can help clarify and
sure.
understand what you're saying. At the end, one has to consider that the efficiency of what the police do and the end result that they enter into, if they're not capable of achieving the end result that should be the where we should be heading, right? Then maybe they need some help, or there needs to be other people involved that may offer a better road to a better end result.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that police officers are employees just like everybody else. They get
Absolutely.
1.3 billion dollars from the city of Toronto. Uh, there are good police officers. There are bad police officers. There are good systems. There are bad systems. And I think as I regard the city council role more like an executive position. So you don't go in there and say everybody in this department is wrong or evil. What you do is you go in and you problem solve, you troubleshoot, and you say, okay, what is the system? And if there has been a bad hire, you deal with that, and but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In
Understood.
terms, also in
Or
terms of
grandstand, right?
yeah,
You know,
that's an issue.
right? Because what you're talking about is not, you know, trying to get votes. It's about trying to solve problems. And sometimes solving problems requires a quiet process,
No
a
kidding.
process
Yeah,
for a
for sure.
reason and a motive, right?
Well, I mean, perversely, I mean, it actually requires a certain amount of humility, which is not a common trait in a politician. And I'm not claiming I have it in abundance, you know. But the point is that part of the a politician's stock in trade is reputation and votes, and so you need to be. I mean, during an election, you have to put up your dukes and put up a good fight. But once that's done, you have to get down to brass tacks, and that means being generous with your fellow councillors in this case, right? Even we've all had to work with people we didn't particularly like, right? That's just called being a grown up, But
Absolutely.
and so there are at City Hall there are 25, so 24 other city councillors, and then the mayor. 25 people, including Nicki Ward, hopefully, in this next election, all of whom have strong opinions, all of whom feel very passionately about their particular area. And some of whom are better qualified than others, and some may have strong political views that you don't necessarily align with. But at the end of the day, a pothole doesn't have a political interest. Pothole's a hole in the ground; it needs to get fixed. So sure, do the thing you need to do, and shake your fist and stand on the soapbox. But when it comes down to business, the business of running an area the size of a small city, then it requires a level of maturity that, to be blunt, we haven't seen in the past.
Do you
And
have
that
any, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
no, 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 please carry on.
I was just going to say, I guess the challenge of being a politician is to discern between what people want and what they need, always on considering budget and how much you've got. So the reality of what you can do is constrained by the amount of money you have to spend, which brings us back to the police thing. That
Right.
if you work them more efficiently, and that's the challenge that you have as a politician, is
Mhm.
explaining to voters. And then once you, because I like what you said, when you when you get elected, it's a different mindset to get elected. There has to be the bit of the tough guy in there, or
Yeah.
tough
Right.
gal, right?
Right.
But the point is that once you get elected, then there has to be that other person that's inside you that wants to serve, as you said. So,
Yeah.
so sometimes you have to answer tough questions or make tough decisions, and they're not always based on what people want, but more about what they need. Is what I was trying to say.
Oh, actually, I think there's a fair amount of overlap in what people want and actually need. I'm knocking on a lot of doors now. I mean, I ran provincially and then came pretty much straight off of that into the municipal election. In the past, 6 months, I've knocked on, 40,000 doors, right, and spoken to a few people. And the thing that we hear all the time is there are a lot of things that we need to deal with, but you can't deal. eat a pizza a slice at a time, right? And so we've identified three key areas that are just seem to be universally wanted and universally needed. The first of these is safety and accessibility, right? Toronto Centre has suffered, uh, and I mean, I don't want to alarm anybody. It's still, relatively speaking, a very safe place, but it's not as safe as the place I fell in love with 35 years ago. And everybody needs to not just feel safe, but actually be safe. I get very annoyed when people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you don't feel safe." Well, when there is there a breakdown of the social contract, when there is gun violence everywhere. I just finished meeting with last earlier this week with Moss Park community, and I've seen the statistics, and the statistics say the same thing that we already see outside. It's not as safe as it used to be. We need to fix that. So safety and accessibility. Housing is a Toronto-wide problem, but Toronto Centre has been dealing with it on a disproportionate basis. So we have more shelters in the downtown core, even though we need more shelters right across Toronto. And so housing is an issue that everybody recognizes as being important. And then the third part of our platform, or our first, the triage, if you will, is mental health and addiction. And that doesn't mean people who are, making a nuisance on the streets. We've all been locked down for the past 3 years. Mental health is not just a crisis for people wrestling with addiction. It's kids, it's adults, it's people working from home, it's people not working, for people who have been laid off perhaps because of COVID. And so mental health is a real crisis. And we have short term, medium term, and long term solutions. Short term to make sure that we deal with the crisis we're in, midterm so that we can start building some strategies in place, and then longer term so that we deal with the core issues, not just the symptoms that we face in society, but the actual disease or the problem behind it.
The cause. I was just saying the cause.
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. And to be brutally honest, again, not, you don't have to be brutal to be honest. Just to be honest, to be frank. Oh, I beg your pardon. To
You're
be
welcome.
candid. To be
You're
candid.
welcome. Your name's not doubled either. Mine is candid. Never mind.
But
Oh,
but to be perfectly candid, there's been an absence of mature decision making at City Hall, in my opinion. I mean, I'm older. I've been around the block a bit, and frankly, know how to get things done. I'm a compassionate person, but I also believe in holding people accountable. It simply hasn't happened in downtown Toronto, maybe some other areas too. But I'm only running right here in Toronto Centre. Although I will say, I'm representing all of the people of Toronto Centre, but I believe in the city of Toronto as a whole. And again, to speak to
well,
that
that's
extent,
part of your position because you're going to be on council. You're going to talk about things as a representative of your community, but there are, the word you use, there's a lot of overlap.
for sure. It's going to be really interesting to see how the new strong mayor powers affect how things work at City Hall. I think if we can get mature, collegial, nonpartisan representation in the downtown core, which I believe I represent, then we can go a long way to stopping this needless and expensive flip flopping from one political football to the next. And I fully expect to work with the new mayor, who many of us suspect to be John Tory, uh, in a collaborative way. I've worked with him on other projects informally, and I don't agree with everything he says, but then that's not necessary to work with the guy. I do know that he's rational, he's logical, he understands, he's thoughtful, and he's not irrational and I would describe as someone as a very mature decision maker. Don't always agree with his decisions, but there's always measured thought that goes into it. He's also been very collaborative over the years. I mean, we talk about a strong mayor. He's never been a pushover, and he's always sought.
He's got a reputation for availability too.
Yeah, and he's always sought a consensus, right? He's always sought consensus. Now, the flip side has not always been true. We have not always had councillors in Toronto Centre and elsewhere, that have been interested in um, collaborative, uh, the kind of collaborative work that's necessary to drive this. I mean, the city of Toronto is a $15 billion budget, right? I mean, that's a big business. That's and although it's always thought of as a joke that people in Toronto think they're the center of Canada, and the people of Toronto Centre think they're the center of Toronto, the truth is that collectively we are the economic engine of Ontario, the economic, cultural, and social engine of Ontario and of Canada, and a good portion of North America. So, yeah, this is no place for petulance or inappropriate grandstanding. We will all go for a mic once in a while, but this people's lives, not money, just people's lives depend on this stuff. And that's the flip side of this whole mental health and addiction crisis we're facing right now. Is it's not just costing us money. It's there's a cost in human lives. People are dying because of lack of access to basic healthcare services. It's horrifying that happens in a country like ours that is theoretically has universal healthcare. We the city of Toronto. I mean, whatever you think about how the city of Toronto has handled some things, we do have a Department of Health. We have navigated a pandemic crisis, something well, something not so well, but we have a system in place to deal with a pandemic, an epidemic that is across many countries. Well, if mental health is reached crisis levels, is a healthcare crisis, which most people seem to think it is, why on earth aren't we treating it as such? I fully believe mental health is just like any other. Break a leg, break a mind. I mean, it's the same stuff, right? You can't separate body and mind. I, I know everybody's family has somebody who's wrestled with mental health, and many of us have families who've wrestled with addiction. There's no stigma there. I mean, maybe on a broader level, but it's healthcare. And we have a healthcare department within the city of Toronto that is just sitting on its hands doing nothing. So that sort of thing has to stop. I mean, it just is meant. It just, at the risk of making a bad joke. I mean, it's insane that we don't deal with mental health crisis like the health crisis it is.
Yeah, there's a big issue there. So as far as you're concerned, then to help with doing that specifically, is it about adding facilities to handle these people? Is it for me it's always complicated. Mental illness, mental health is an issue. I've had my experiences with it. I'm not going to get into them here, but
Right.
what I did learn is that a lot of times the biggest problem with depression, mental illness, and is basically being on your own and nowhere to go and nowhere to expand your mind or relate to other people. The word community comes to mind, and being a
Mm,
part of it helps, right? And you're vying to be a community builder,
yeah.
and so therefore, how do you see getting people out of their homes? Because ultimately, I think Nikki, we can agree that people have spent too much time in their home in recent
Right.
memory. And
Yeah.
I think that's what leads to addiction. That's what leads to depression. That's what leads to people not, because we if we relate to people, our lives are better. That's
Yeah.
one thing I think I can believe in.
I completely agree with you. I mean, isolation is a huge issue, and part of that, I mean, as we emerge, sort of blinking into the sunlight of a post-COVID world, or at least a world where this world, then many of us are coming out and seeing that our parks, which are part of our physical and mental health, cannot be used. That there is not a feeling of physical safety on the streets. So that is people would why would you go out? I would take my dog out for walks at all times of the day and night. Generally speaking, I still do. I'm pretty tough broad on all in all, uh, but I've never felt like I had to keep an eye over my shoulder at all times, and that's got to stop. But the other part is that no matter about isolation, we also need access to healthcare, and the city of Toronto has a big part to play in that, and it hasn't done a good job. Um, I will tell you, as a former insurance industry executive, that the uh, almost everybody at some time in their life will have a mental health incident that they themselves need to deal with. I can tell you that in terms of the broader family, it's essentially 100%. If you include in brothers and sisters and parents and children, it's virtually 100%. And if we are genuinely to look at mental health as a healthcare issue, then we have to stop mucking around with it. Stop hand wringing and saying, oh, oh, we can't judge people. Well, I don't judge a person with diabetes, but I would also not encourage somebody with diabetes to I would encourage them to have a good diet and to self-regulate and self-medicate. And yet we don't have quite the same even-handed approach when we talk about mental health and addiction. Okay, there
Well,
is
there's
no. Go ahead.
attached. That's why, right? It's the judgment you have to remove.
Well, I think actually most people are judgment. Again, most people have got a family member who has wrestled with one thing or another, whether it's booze or drugs or behaviors of some kind or another that were destructive. So again, I don't. I mean, we don't talk about it a great deal, but you know, we need to help people who have diabetes, and there's nothing wrong with that. So why do some people have an issue when talking about uh, uh, drugs and alcohol or anything else, right? Let's make sure that we have access to treatment and access to healthcare, which we don't really have a smooth path for that right now.
And so, uh, okay, healthcare in Toronto needs some attention, and you're willing to give it.
Sure.
How do you feel about taxes that people are paying? It's a paying. So it's the money, stupid,
Well,
that drives people, right? You know what I mean?
that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that I always approach these kind of issues with was a sort of a triangle in mind. If it is economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, can't be poisoning the planet, right? Don't poison your own drinking water, and socially sustainable, meaning that there's enough political will behind it. That's the sort of the magic triangle for getting things done. Uh, I believe that there is a lot of low hanging fruit in the city of Toronto's budget. In fact, I know there is. Some of it just needs to be reapportioned and spent more intelligently. And so, circling back to policing, police services themselves recognize that sending someone with a gun and a pair of handcuffs to deal with somebody who's having a mental health breakdown just doesn't work. Sending a fire truck, which I often see in the downtown core, again, I don't understand why we send a $2 million fire truck with 10 burly guys on it to deal with somebody who's clearly having a mental health breakdown. So one of the things that I propose is taking some of our EMS money, emergency medical services. So 1.3 billion goes to the cops, about 350 goes to paramedics, and I'm not entirely sure, but I would think about 500 goes to fire services. Well, let's move some of that budget around. Our paramedics do an amazing job with people who are underhoused, who are on the streets, who have these breakdowns. Let's take some of that 1.3 billion and portion it over there to those in the dealing with paramedical services, because paramedical treatment is quite literally what is going on in our streets. So, but circling back to taxes, oftentimes politicians will say the solution is to throw more money at a problem. Throw more money at police, throw more money at housing, throw more money. And don't get me wrong, I mean, the cure for poverty is definitely more money. But in that process, too often, it's overlooked that we have inefficiencies in the system. And weirdly, I mean, I'm considered a small p progressive uh, candidate, but you know, I may not be sounding quite as center left as I actually am, but I believe that we have money in the system that is going to complete. I don't even believe it. I've seen it. I have worked for a city agency. I've seen the unusual accounting practices that they use to justify their existence. Makes sense to them, but don't make sense to anybody from the private sector. And I've seen we have for example, when it comes to policing services in Toronto, they assign pretty much an equal number of police officers based on the ward size. Well, you know, some wards have more crime than others. Toronto Centre has more crime, not because we have more criminals, but because it's a center of congregation. So people come down to Dundas Square or down to wherever they're going to, and criminality occurs in this location. So instead of assigning police officers based on how many residents we have in an area, let's assign it based on the kind of activities in an area. And so this has not been happening before in Toronto Centre at all. We have the vast majority, sadly, a large number of shootings, a large number of violent crimes, and a large in our neighborhood. Not because the people here are inherently bad, but because it's the center of congregation. So we need policing that is proportional to that, not to some bizarre population measure. So I think there's money in the system, and I'm not in favor of raising taxes. I think we can do some things to make the tax system more fair, but actually raising taxes overall, I don't think that's necessary at this time.
So I guess I'll review what you said by saying this and hope that I understand you. Is basically don't throw money at the symptom, throw money at the
Yeah.
solution.
Well, in fact, I would go one step further and say throw attention, energy, and some intelligence to the solution, and then, and only then, throw money. But don't lead with the checkbook, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, yeah,
We can all agree with that,
yeah.
but sometimes what happens, the word pork always comes in when it comes to
Sure,
politicians. So
sure. Got Canadian bacon, right?
absolutely, let's talk about the environment. You touched on it a little bit. You're a big fan of the environment.
Sure, it's,
You
it's
like
where I live.
tell me all about it.
Well, look,
What you're going to do as a municipal leader to help our environment?
well, okay. Think globally, act locally. I started out in the environmental movement out in Europe quite a long time ago. I'm actually eligible for a pension. I age pretty well, but I'm eligible. So it's a while ago, and the environmental movement, the conservation movement, was not really attached to any one political side or another. It was about let's save the planet. I don't know if you remember. We used to have a big old ozone hole in the ozone layer. Do you remember that?
Yep.
We fixed it. I don't hear about it anymore. It wasn't because it's because we tackled it as a serious
We're
thing.
all can.
Yeah,
Bye.
exactly. So I see no reason why we can't do the same thing for our other issues. In Toronto Centre, we again because we are geographically a very small area, but we've got 110,000 people here, and cities are where the majority of the world's population lives. So if you find a city solution for climate change and environmental issues, then you find a solution for the vast majority of people on the planet. So here in Toronto Centre, for example, we have some of the highest number of people that have electric vehicles, generally thought to be a good thing. But we've got no place to plug them in. So there aren't enough public plug-in stations. We have not a lot of ground space for parks, but boy, do we ever have a lot of tall buildings. And so we can put some green space on the top of the buildings or at elevated areas. And so there are an awful lot of solutions, many of which have already been successfully put into place in Europe, to that we can put into place and pilot test here in Toronto Centre specifically. When they work here in Toronto Centre, not if, because you're not going to take on something that doesn't work, pilot test it, then that is something that can be replicated elsewhere in Toronto. One of the big things that really frustrates me about city planning in general is we look to Manhattan, New York City, for our solutions. Now, I like New York City. I spent some time living there before I decided to live in Toronto Centre. That tells you all you need to know. Well, I mean, I like it well enough, but it's not where I want to live. It's not our culture. It's not our value system. It's not our climate. It's not the same economic environment. It doesn't make sense. And so we constantly take bad ideas that New York City has already rejected and then bring them up here. Well, my proposition is that we take good ideas from anywhere and everywhere, and we maybe export them to our friends to the south if they want. If they don't, that's fine. Because we all recognize that with more people on the planet, more pollution, and yes, climate change, that this is something we all have to tackle, regardless of what your political makeup is. And also, we recognize that there's money in them Dara hills. One of the things we were able to do in terms of advocacy before was help convert Doug Ford into electric vehicles. Doug Ford loves electric vehicles. Why? Well, because we've got quite a lot of the minerals that go into making batteries in northern Ontario. and it's good for business as well as being good for the planet. So, yeah, this is what, and we can do this in Toronto Centre in ways that we might not be able to do elsewhere. There's a lot of political, in that magic triangle of economic, environmental, and social sustainability. There's an enormous amount of political will to doing some of this, getting to some of this low hanging fruit. Electric vehicles is pretty much a slam dunk. The thing is self funding because if we put plug in stations in Green P parking, which is a municipal, it's attached to City of Toronto, complicated. The relationship is complicated, but the bottom line, city parking theoretically belongs to the City of Toronto. If we put plug in locations in there, we charge money for that. It's not just revenue neutral, it actually makes money. Right now, we have people with cars, Teslas and other fancy cars, that drive downtown, pay for the very expensive parking in the private parking because they can then plug in their vehicle. So they pay twice. They're prepared to pay a surcharge, whatever it is, $20 or $30 to park downtown core just so they can plug in their vehicle. That seems to me, I mean, it's not a no brainer, but it's pretty low hanging fruit.
Yeah, what you're talking about is through leadership and your triangle, if you wish.
Yeah.
Through leadership and your triangle, you can create opportunities where you can be more of a leader than a follower, but lead in the sense of finding the right answers. And if you have advantages, like you said, like
Mm,
former Ford noticed that Northern Ontario has the mineral resources to do such a thing. It
mhm.
is a slam dunk, and
Yeah,
it's
we're also seeing a lot of good things coming down the pipe. Remember, you heard it here first on retrofits, right? This is going to be a big, big, big thing going forward as we see energy prices increasing around the world. Retrofitting building, the inclusion of solar panels, which can also be put on the top of these tall buildings that are right behind you there. The turbine collecting the city of Toronto is not very windy, but the top of those buildings behind you, Frank, those are very windy indeed. And there's an ideal location for some kind of turbine generation. So generating power locally and certainly offsetting the cost of running those buildings. So retrofitting is going to become very, very big business, and that is something that is a service industry. And something that we as Canadians are very well, and Torontonians are very well qualified to do, not just the financing of retrofit, but the installation because of our extreme weather patterns. So, we do a lot of things very, very well here: insulation, windows, power generation, and so forth. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done that meet that magic triangle of economic, environmental, and social slash politically sustainable. And with those things, opportunities at hand, politics is the art of the possible. It baffles me why people spend so much time arguing about things that they cannot change when there are so many things where there's really a significant amount of agreement. Circling back to what you said before, there's a significant amount of agreement about what we want and what we need. There's a significant amount of agreement. So why go looking for a fight somewhere else when there's so much agreement? You know, unless maybe there's a political axe that you have to grind. But frankly, I don't. I'm only interested in helping this place that I genuinely love.
Well, I hear you, and what you're talking about, and what most politicians talk about always is about change. But there's
Mm.
also sustainability that needs to be taken in consideration. In other words, we might be doing some stuff right that we need to protect. I guess that's an important issue as well, which I
Yeah.
think you were kind of leading to there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a development in the downtown core. There's a relief line coming through. There's a lot of things going on in the downtown core, Toronto Centre. There's a Metrolinx relief line coming down from the east and then going and down directly through us. There's obviously a lot of development. That's an old photograph, and behind you there are now more buildings than ever. So those are creating construction woes. We've got the TTC doing Toronto Transit Commission. We've got water treatment. We've got lead in the water, and so we've got water supply, but we've also got water removal, water treatment, none of which, of course, has been coordinated. Uh, and going back to the environmental component, there's an area called Moss Park, and there's a row of trees there. Now, some trees, some trees have to go in the way of progress, but these are old growth. These are 100-year-old trees. And just because they don't want to move the station 20 feet, we're talking about 20 feet, talking about closing a city park, and tearing down 100-year-old trees. Ask me how long it takes to grow a 100-year-old tree.
Couple of weeks.
You know, 100 years. That's turns out.
Oh, okay, that was a rhetorical question. Okay.
No, I mean, it sounds,
Or was
no,
it?
yeah, it takes 100 years to grow a 100-year tree. So after 10 years of construction, they're going to say, oh, we'll replant. Well, I'd like to enjoy the trees, and I'd like my kids to enjoy the trees. No, I want my great grandchildren to enjoy the trees, if indeed they ever get done. Because this is another problem with all the development downtown. There's I'm showing my age, but there's an old saying. I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today.
Wimpy.
Exactly. Uh, the that ages both of us, I'm afraid. But
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll see you
Little Abner.
again. I'm close. I'm late.
But the point is that these developers make wild promises as to what they will do in the future, and who knows if they'll even be in business 10, 15, 20 years from now. So we've got to make sure that these projects, which are important, need to get done. It's that there are any community offsets. So whether there's money for the community, whether there's park space for the community, that is done before they break ground. So those monies are held in trust. You know that money is they are bonded, right? If I want to get my kitchen redone, okay, I want to make sure that the person is insured, right? And if he doesn't do the work properly, that I've got some recourse then. Well, we don't have that. We've got these billion-dollar projects going up, and we've got no recourse. So I'm saying let's put the money in the bank ahead of time. Let's use it and if they then choose not to develop for whatever reason, because interest rates go up or because they change their mind or the company goes bankrupt, we, the residents of the city of Toronto, still have those community benefits. And a tree, in that sense, is a community benefit, right? Better for us. So we have this downtown core, this Moss Park. I am dead set against using the park as a place for construction vehicles and VIP parking for construction workers. They can take the TTC like the rest of us and leave at least some portion of that park space for us to enjoy while they're doing the other things that needs to be done.
We've got a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that we review, and I'll let you do the reviewing of why folks should vote for you in Ward 13, Mr. Nicki Ward.
Right. Well, okay. Well, look, this is a job interview, right? I mean, it's a service. It's a calling. Um, it's an important job that depends on people's lives. That affects people directly. And I would encourage people to do their homework and see who is best qualified, who they believe. Not just somebody who is talking platitudes, but somebody with practical experience who, is accessible, open-minded to new ideas, but having had those ideas has the gumption and the will to carry those through, and who understands the difference between standing your ground and deliberate confrontation and name calling. I've been in a position where people have disagreed with me, and I've disagreed with them, yeah, I've had to stand my ground. But those people will still talk to me. Those people will still do business with me, even if we disagreed. And so, who's got the qualifications? Who's got the background? Who do you believe? And vote. And in this election in Toronto Centre, because it's an open seat, the old councillor left. It's really important to vote. If you are happy with everything, do nothing. Don't vote. But if you want change, then do something. Vote for Nicki Ward.
Well, I think you can vote for people to make sure, like I said, sustainability is really important as well, right? Like remembering that not everything's all bad, and
Mm.
making sure that we pay attention to what we got that's working and make sure it keeps working.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Change
for sure.
is
Yeah,
necessary.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, what you're doing here helps a great deal. People need to do their homework. This is important stuff. Now, sometimes at City Hall, there's no changing. If you've got an incumbent in there, no, often there's not a lot of movement. But in this riding right downtown, we're putting up a pretty strong fight here. And there's a change of coming. If you want to participate, all you got to do is get up and vote. The advance polls are open tomorrow, right across Toronto, fully accessible sites from Friday the 7th through to Friday the 14th, including, I just checked this today, including Thanksgiving, so the Monday holiday, that you can still go out and vote there. If you're filled up on turkey and you just want to get away from the family, then you can just go out and vote. So. Yeah.
So are you a paper vote guy, a gal, or vote by internet person?
Well, we can't vote by internet yet, and the mailing process was a bit clunky this time. I like to go to the. I like to see it go in the box. I like to see it go in there
Me too.
and put it in. So I will be voting first thing at the advance polls tomorrow, and I think they open at 10. And yeah, this is going to be yeah, it's going to be a big one.
And I wish you all the luck in the world, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for this. It's been great. Really, really
She's
appreciate
Nicki
it.
Ward, vying for the opportunity to represent the people of Ward 13 Toronto Centre. And I'm Frank Stanishi. Thank you for watching the program. And of course, if you want to see more like this, you can watch it on the Spanglish World Radio Network as well. And this ends another episode of Open Forum where we get to meet all the candidates.
It's great.
Thanks again to Ms. Ward. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers.